Hello, everyone. My name is John Mott, and my presentation is titled George III, Contemporary Historical Analysis. Some background on this project. It was a school project I worked on in two separate phases in two different classes over two different semesters. I wanted to learn more about King George III and how much truth there is to some of the negative aspects that the king is known for. So indeed, he was a British king during the American Revolution. He was a heavily demonized figure. The picture here is Dwight Hamilton. He's kind of represented as like a conniving tyrant. And I wanted to learn how much of this popular legacy is preserved. To answer this question, I consulted the works of numerous historians, including Jeremy Black, Stephen Griffin, Peter Thomas, John Hammond, and John Brooks, all of whom have written extensively on King George III. And then for the second phase of my project, which I looked at specifically primary sources, I consulted with Laura James Carroll, who extensively covered Catholics living in North America at the time of the American Revolution. The cool fact is that I emailed her and she actually responded to some of my questions. I really appreciated that. I thought that was really nice. Overall, the historiography about George III concerns some things and the kind of disprove some of the myths about the king. Some of these things that historians have praised about the king include his personal morality. King George III did not have a mistress. He stayed loyal to his wife Charlotte, which many monarchs during this time were more promiscuous, and they tended to cheat on their spouses. George III was not one of them. He saw himself as the head of the Church of England, so he was a very religious man. He was willing to put the needs of his country over his own personal desires. For example, he wanted to marry a woman named Sarah Lennox, but he chose not to once he thought about the fact that she was the sister-in-law of a very unscrupulous politician. Overall, historians have praised George III for his duty, his honesty, his steadfastness, his charity, as well as his liberality. He was a king who most historians believe was not one who was power hungry. He wanted to represent all of the people rather than just the Whig party that put him into power. He was not an absolutist. He accepted legislation to ban the slave trade. Another thing that he's praised for is the fact that he was a patron of the arts. He was interested in things such as astronomy, music, art, literature. He paid for many of these with his own money. Overall, what we have is a king who is a fairly magnanimous person. He was not the absolute monarch tyrant that American history is often hinted at. However, historians are not totally going to absolve George III in things that he was wrong. For example, they often criticize the early ones of his reign. For example, he was very much influenced by his mentor, the Earl of Bute, who he kind of saw as a father figure. And this man had a very simple worldview where a moral monarch could solve all of the world's problems. George, in his early years as king, decided to appoint this man to be the prime minister of England. And this was not a good decision because Bute was a very incompetent politician, and this left George alienated. Another thing that George is often criticized for is the American Revolution, which is the thing he's most known for. During this war, before the war, he supported the Stamp Act, which is really what led to the colonists rebelling in the first place, a tax on people's goods that they did not appreciate. Now, during the war itself, George III refused to follow his general's advice on a naval blockade during a land invasion of the North American colonies. He refused to give this war north to George Sackville, two men who were responsible for this failing war effort out of personal loyalty to those men. He prolonged the war when there was no hope of actually winning. Finally, historians have criticized George III for the way he treated his sons. George IV in throwing the sword, both his monarch. He tried to impose his personal morality on them, and this didn't work. He left them bottled up, and they cracked under pressure once they became kings. They were known to be heathenistic, and they were very unpopular with the British people. And the British monarchy itself would remain unpopular until the rise of Queen Victoria in 1839. So for the second phase of my project, I kind of looked at how is George III specifically looked at and perceived in his own lifetime by the people he ruled over. I looked at North American Catholics to conduct a study. A key part of this study is the Quebec Act, which was an act of religious toleration towards Catholics living in the province of Quebec that was passed in 1774 by the British government. Now, some other primary sources that I looked at included the three-part series, Catholics in the American Revolution, which was published in 1907 by Mark I.J. Griffin. Looked at little anecdotes of letters and stuff written by people in the 1700s by Catholics and others. It was great to see how people really thought about the situation. That was a great primary source. Another example of a primary source that I looked at was Hypocrisy Unmasked, which was written by Ezra Stiles, who was an anti-Catholic who lived during the American Revolution. Reading his opinions is just another interesting thing that helped me to form my own opinions. Another primary source I looked at was the March 17, 1775 edition of the Massachusetts Spy, which was a Boston newspaper. I was able to get this into the library alone. I thought it was really cool to be able to read a newspaper from the time of the American Revolution, which shortly before. Now, this particular newspaper is interesting because one of the front cover stories is talking about a man named Virginius, who claimed that the Quebec Act was forcing the Roman Catholic religion on the North American people, even though it really only related to the province of Quebec. He claimed that it erected a great tyranny there to the great danger of the neighboring British colonies. As you may know, the American colonies, the 13 colonies that would become the United States, we tended to have a Protestant tradition and were vehemently anti-Catholic. They thought that tolerance for Catholicism anywhere was a threat to Protestantism in their own colonies. And this newspaper discusses a protest that occurred in which flag bearers hoisted flags that said George III, Rex, and the liberties of America, no popery. This was kind of an inclination, it kind of demonstrated that the people wanted the king to represent themselves, the Protestants, at the expense of the Catholics. Now, Canadian Catholics responded to the Quebec Act with loyalty, but overall there was an apathetic reaction from American Catholics, whom the Quebec Act was kind of meant to increase the loyalty of. Ultimately, this didn't really work out, and during the American Revolution, it was the Canadians, and many of whom were Catholic, who supported the British Crown, and American Catholics did not support the British Crown during the American Revolution. Overall, this boils down to a matter of different perceptions, personified by two men, Bishop Riand on the left and Charles Carroll of Carrollton on the right. Bishop Riand was the Archbishop of Quebec during the American Revolution, and he saw the Quebec Act as kind of like an act from God that showed how great of a king George III was. And he repaid George III with loyalty. He suppressed priests who supported the American Revolution, and overall Canada followed suit, supporting George III, as I said. And on the other hand, you have Charles Carroll, who was a Catholic. He lived in Maryland, where most American Catholics lived at the time of the Revolution. He kind of represented the American Catholic community. He was the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence. During the Revolution, he gave advice to George Washington. He was a leading figure in Maryland, and overall, like I said, most Catholics followed his example of being patriots for the American Revolutionary cause. Yeah, so overall, you have Canada, which is loyalist, and America, which is rebelling against the king. This, even among the Catholics, this divide remained. And overall, they were not swayed by the Quebec Act, and they perceived George, which ultimately the way the rest of their respective colonies perceived the king. So in the end, George III is a man of mixed legacy. Historians will praise him for the things he did right, while criticizing him justly for the things that he did wrong. And this very much follows a trend of what happened in his lifetime, where people were able to criticize him for things that they didn't like about him, and they praised him for the things they did like. In the case of the American colonies, in particularly the passage of the Quebec Act, you have Canadian Catholics who respond with loyalty to the king. They perceive him as a good man and a liberator, whereas the American Catholics, much like their Protestant brethren, perceived him as a tyrant who needed to be removed from power in the wise. That's all I've got for you today. Thank you so much.